Is Fallout 4 a good game? That's a question I've been asking myself for nearly a decade at this point. And it's a debate that started up again at the start of this year thanks to the release of Amazon's TV adaptation, which got a bunch of fans, both old and new, going to the games, and specifically Fallout 4. Now, back in 2015, I personally loved my time with the fourth installment. Hell, it was the first game that I ever put more than 100 hours into, but in the years since, that glow has kind of waned and personally given way to the popular and not wrong criticisms that the game has received. You know, the base building sucked, the RPG choices were non-existent, the wasteland was boring, the radiant quests were monotonous, the loot was unsatisfying. In the years since, I thought about all of this stuff and I mellowed on the game, thinking, was it ever as good as I thought it was? Did I really like it back in 2015, or was my love for the franchise doing the heavy lifting? Well, this year I played it again and, for myself at least, could come to the conclusion that Fallout 4 is a damn good game. Sorry, I can't help it. This might not have been the conclusion you wanted me to draw, but I'm just a simp for this thing. Let me explain. First things first, those criticisms I mentioned are absolutely valid. I'm not going to try and convince you that those are wrong or that the game doesn't have any flaws. It has many, many flaws. However, the key to enjoying Fallout 4 is coming to terms with what the game isn't. Namely, it's not really concerned with being a good Fallout game or even an RPG at all. There aren't really character builds, the moral choices you get to make are few and far between, and the communities of NPCs don't really exist unless you're looking directly at them. What Fallout 4 is concerned with being, though, is a dense open world shooter with RPG elements, and on those terms, it absolutely is one of the best in class. What I realized playing Starfield last year, which I also loved, I know, I'm so sorry, and playing Fallout 4 in 2024, is that Bethesda games are kind of like a digital drug. The interplay of mechanics all seem designed to keep you playing and coming back for another hit, if not in the world at large, then your character's own power progression. And I'm going to try and explain why, but Fallout 4 just has a knack of completely taking over my life every single time I sit down to play it. What I thought was just going to be a nice little stint in the game at the start of the year turned out to be 70 hours of pretty much constant play. It turned me into a little gremlin like it did back in 2015 with the thrill of exploration and leveling up, keeping me hooked for days. And part of the reason why is that Fallout 4 is an audio-visual delight. It's almost Diablo or Borderlands-esque in the way that it keeps hitting you with dopamine hits for your actions. In this way, it's less about the bigger picture then, but more about the in-the-moment enjoyment of just playing. From the bloody satisfaction of turning a raider into moat to the ka-ching sound effect that plays every time you bank some experience points, that constant feedback of, hey, you're doing a good job, buddy, has been distilled down to a science. It helps that the gameplay feels better than ever as well. With a little help from id Software, gunplay is finally enjoyable to engage with large encounters dynamically punctuating the map. Going back, I was surprised by the scale of some of these combat situations, and how well they were framed against the open world with multiple entry points and ways to engage. Also, it just feels good to blast someone's head off with an upgraded 50 caliber sniper rifle round and then mop up everything that isn't pinned down. More than just pushing your pleasure buttons though, Fallout 4's loot becomes so intoxicating because of the way it intertwines all of its core mechanics. And that's because Fallout 4 at its heart is a game primarily about junk. Exploring lets you pick up junk, killing enemies lets you pick up junk, completing quests lets you pick up junk, and all of that junk can then be stashed back at home base to upgrade, you guessed it, your junk. In this case, your gear such as armor, weapons, or even your settlement. As a result though, no trip into the wasteland ever feels wasted. Even the most minor of raider camps will feel worthwhile because you're bringing back resources that are ultimately going to improve your character's power. It makes for a great little hamster wheel of positive reinforcement, one that always feels player directed as well. Between you and me, I'm burying the lead here though, because Fallout 4's gameplay would be nothing without its signature feature, a Boston Commonwealth. This is the foundation that elevates the core gameplay loop and gives players a canvas on which to paint their own story on. And truth be told, this was another element that I'd sort of taken for granted in the 9 years since release, with my memories of Boston becoming a blur of repeated industrial factories, desolate subways, and super mutant hideouts. And while those points of interest do indeed sometimes dominate the map, for the most part the Boston Commonwealth remains a diverse and interesting place full of memorable locales. My heart personally will remain forever in the Mojave Desert, but I gotta admit the Boston Commonwealth is as good as any other map in the main series. Part of the reason why is that although being smaller, at least comparatively to other open world games of the time, it is absolutely dense with detail. You can lose hours picking clean small towns and indulging in your sense of curiosity. The level of environmental detail on display is truly astonishing. Though there are some repeated textures and templates, you can see the effort on display from the developers to add a human touch to almost every location. Sometimes this just amounts to a couple of props or scrawled words in a single room, but cumulatively the sheer amount of these touches serves to make the Commonwealth a place that feels truly lived in. Though overloaded with points of interest, it should be commended just how many of those manage to leave a mark. I've not played this game in 9 years, and even back then I only went through it once with one big master save. I couldn't believe it then that on this return journey, I was remembering so many locations and quests that were still vivid in my mind. And I don't just mean the big things like Diamond City or the Brotherhood's airship either. I'm talking about random shacks, one-room interiors and tucked-away dungeons, the junkyards hiding treasures and panic bunkers from long-dead survivors, the flooded towns and villages occupied by a lone friendly sniper. The amount of locations that hit rather than miss, I think, reflects just an incredible feat in map design. But let me talk about one of those bigger areas just for a second. Let's look at the Glowing Sea, genuinely one of my favorite locations in any Fallout game. It's just that good and it's just that memorable. This section of the map is where a nuclear bomb directly hit, and even 200 years later it remains a completely destroyed, irradiated hellscape. It's the most hostile place in Boston, an area that requires power armor just to step foot in it, if not for the radiation, then for the mutated beasties that call this place their home. It's such an evocative environment though, one that feels inherently mysterious. The points of interest here are different to those you find in the rest of the world. Forgotten military bases housing thousands of nuclear warheads, bombed out craters inhabited by radiation-loving children of the atom, and buildings almost entirely buried by irradiated rubble. Bethesda employs some neat tricks to add to the mystery as well, allowing you to venture well beyond the confines of the borders of the map screen, which in turn makes you feel like you're in uncharted territory outside of the game world itself. Of course, in reality, you're not breaking the game or breaking any rules, but the illusion that it creates of you doing that in the moment is a powerful one. I thought the Glowing Sea was kind of wasted potential back in 2015, but in 2024, I genuinely think it's amazing. The biome diversity generally is something to be championed as well. Again, I'm impressed with Fallout 4 here, even if it doesn't necessarily align with my own personal tastes. I personally like my post-apocalyptic wastelands to be just that, wastelands. I was one of those freaks that was never bothered by the sea of grey brick that made up Fallout 3's capital wasteland, and as such I was initially wary of Fallout 4's colourful, at least in comparison, colour palette. I can't deny that it's striking though, and further allows the Boston Commonwealth to go toe-to-toe with previous locations in the series in terms of sheer memorability. The mixture of dense urban environments with the harbours and coastlines on the outskirts of the map constantly provides the player with gripping things to see. Even if the things that you're doing in them remain the same, killing, scavenging, and hauling around junk, the diversity of the backdrop makes it feel like you're constantly seeing and doing something new. With this in mind, Fallout 4's ability to make an impression with the Boston Commonwealth is absolutely huge. It might not be the most reactive world that you'll find in an RPG, but it's absolutely a joy to explore and, more importantly, to just live in. And when it comes to Bethesda's Fallout games, the experience of exploring is the main selling point, right? Like, we aren't going to these games these days expecting tip-top, in-depth RPG choices or narratives or anything like that. I don't think so anyway. With Fallout 3 and especially Fallout 4, I always think the focus is on the player's journey rather than the larger story. It's less about the decisions that you make in the narrative, but the way that you interact with that narrative, or let's face it, choose not to interact with it. It's about how players charted the path from point A to B and how many pit stops came in between. When I think about Fallout 4, I don't really think about the railroad or the Institute, as cool ideas as they may be. I think about the hour that I spent clearing out a suburb full of super mutants that I accidentally ran into while trying to escape an Enclave assault team. I think about loading up my power armor for a trip into the glowing sea and discovering the final recorded moments of a crashed airplane. I think about spending absolutely ages creating the most ramshackle bar at Sanctuary Hills that you've ever seen, and then feeling an immense amount of satisfaction when that evening all of my settlers came to the bar to have a drink and talk to Nick, who was the bartender. I wanted to give him another job. He suits that role really well. He's a friendly face. Who else do you want serving your drinks? And it's this focus to me that makes Fallout 4 so much better than the sum of its quite frankly battered parts. And battered in a bad way, not battered like in a fish. I find the enjoyment of Fallout 4 less in how authored it is, but in how it gives you the tools to express yourself at every step in the Boston Commonwealth. You and I probably both destroyed the Institute or the Brotherhood of Steel, but what stories did you concoct along the way? Did you, like me, save a snub-nosed revolver in your inventory that you only used for special executions? Did you make the Vault-Tec sales rep a bar in your main settlement to give his life a bit of purpose? Did you give your character new scars after a particularly tough battle? Do they have specific outfits depending on where they are currently in the story? How did you get through this world? What is it that you care about? Those are the questions that define why Fallout 4 is such a special experience. In his excellent deep dive into the whole franchise, Noah Caldwell-Gervais described the Bethesda Fallout experiences as putting you into a simulation, one centered entirely around the player character and the player's experience that is designed to end when they decide that they've had their fill. And I can fully understand why that idea is exactly why some people bounce off Bethesda games in general, but honestly, it's exactly why I love them. I still think they're the pinnacle of player-directed experiences in giving you a landscape to experience something that, at the end of the day, feels uniquely yours and only yours. However, I also think that player-driven focus is what makes the question of, is Fallout 4 a good game, so contentious? And that's because Fallout 4, by design, means so many different things to so many different people and throws everything at the wall in the hopes that different players will find something in there that clicks with them. And for me, it does click, and the moment-to-moment satisfaction of playing Fallout 4, of living in that world, uncovering the map piece by piece and gaining power by killing hundreds of creatures and enemies, provides a more intoxicating loop than most video games could ever dream of creating. Its artistic design, satisfying feedback, and incredible soundtrack has me feeling like one of those rats in those lab experiments where they just press the pleasure button over and over again until they die. I'm pressing the pleasure button. That's me in the pleasure dome. And of course, when I exit the experiment or the simulation, as Noah Gervais describes, I can see all of the drawbacks to it that you can. I can lament at how shallow the writing is, how the cities and settlements feel like they have like 5 people who live in them, how the perk system is the epitome of wasted potential, how it will never hold a candle as being anywhere near as important to me personally as Fallout New Vegas. But when I'm in it, God, it can feel like the best game ever made. Thank you all for staying to the end of this video, and thank you to Dan Durkin or whoever edited this video for putting up with me messing around with my hair in between takes. It's the first face to cam I've done since getting a haircut, and I'm very scared of what people think. And also I wanted to take this second to shout out that Nojave video that I talked about in the essay. It was a video that I watched up until the point where he covers Fallout 4 because I didn't want any cross-pollination in that regard. And since writing it, and between recording this, I've actually gone back and watched his Fallout 4 section, and I thought it was really fascinating and kind of funny because we are so similar in our analysis, but the things that we're talking about, he really doesn't like, yet it's what makes me really enjoy the game. So I'd definitely check out that video because it really is 2 sides of the same coin. I was really laughing at some points because I think he's a great critic and it's such a great video. And to be exactly on the other side, but for the same reasons, I think is why gaming criticism is so good and why it's so fun to do this job. So on top of that, I want to know what you guys thought of this video and what you think about Fallout 4 9 years later. I'm still not quite getting over that. Thank you for sticking to the end, though. Until next time, I've been Josh, and thanks a lot.
Push the pleasure button. Push the pleasure button.